After reading the biography of this renowned prisoner, you may think that he's a fictional character. He visited as many as 120 prisons, fought countless times alone against a crowd of guards, often doing so naked, several times took hostages for fun, and put forward absurd demands like, "I'll let the hostage go if you give me a helicopter, a rubber woman, and a cup of tea." This mighty madman who fought a rottweiler with his bare hands and knocked out a cow with one blow has been in prison almost perpetually since the age of 22. The kicker is that he didn't kill or rape anyone, didn't take part in high-profile scams or bank robberies, but has been, for a long time now, serving a life sentence. They even made a movie about him starring Tom Hardy. Needless to say, the fate of the most dangerous prison in Great Britain is both fascinating and remarkable. But how did he get to where he is now? And when will he ever get out of prison? Charles Bronson isn't the actual name of our hero. In fact, that's the name of a Hollywood actor who was a popular hero in westerns in the 1960s. Our Bronson was born in the middle of the 20th century in Luton, a small town in England, and was known as Michael Peterson until the age of 35. In childhood, he didn't show a single hint of what this sweet boy would become, although some sources claim that Michael loved to fight since pre-adolescence. He was one of 3 sons of reasonably wealthy parents, and his uncle was elected town mayor twice. According to witnesses, Michael was described as a kind and gentle child who got along well with other children and never misbehaved until the age of 13, when something suddenly inside of him changed. The family moved to another city, and Michael transformed from a quiet boy into an inveterate hooligan. He even became a member of a teenage gang of 4 robbers and was caught stealing once. Michael also began to rarely appear at school, but still somehow managed to complete it. After school, Peterson didn't want to go to post-secondary to ensure a future profession, and instead returned to his beloved hometown, which his family had once left. His first job was at the famous British store Tesco, where he worked for 2 weeks before getting fired for assaulting his manager. He changed several jobs, working as a mover, a transporter, as well as in several factories. He then found himself a girlfriend, but the relationship quickly ended when Michael got in a fight with his father, smashed several cars in rage, and was sent to prison for the first time in 18 months. When Michael got out, he found a job as a truck driver, but didn't last long there either. A few months in, he crashed into another car, got scared, and fled the scene. Peterson drove 90 miles to his parents' house without stopping, but the police were already waiting for him. As a matter of fact, Michael had every chance of going back to prison, but he was saved by the fact that the driver he crashed into survived, so Michael was sentenced to only a fine and a suspended sentence. By the time he was 19, the once sweet and kind boy became an avid petty criminal who had received numerous fines and been in prison. But still, Michael briefly attempted to get back to his senses. In 1971, he met a new girl who soon became pregnant, and Michael, like a proper man, decided to get married and even found a legitimate job performing in the circus. He was incredibly strong, so lifting weights for money was not a bad gig. By the way, despite his simple work, Michael never had problems with money. This is how his wife described him. He always wore tailored suits and had perfectly groomed sideburns. Michael earned pennies, but his rich parents always supported him, which is why his next stunt defies any logic. At the age of 22, Peterson, without any reason, robbed a post office and only took a measly £26 from the till. Why he did it is still a mystery, most likely for the fun of it. Michael didn't go on the run either, and very soon he was found and arrested. For his brief moment of joy, Michael received 7 years. However, he would be out after no less than 13 as, when in prison, he continued his unexplainable activity. The first thing Peter did out of the blue was attack 2 other prisoners. He was sent to the sweatbox, and as soon as he came out, started another fight. Michael, growing up in a good family, surprisingly felt comfortable for the first time in his life only in prison. The prison where he was serving time was Category C. That is, it was far from the strictest, and they couldn't do anything with violent prisoners, which is why he eventually was sent to another prison, Walton Jail. The rules here were much stricter, and the guards were much harsher. Every prisoner had to work to rehabilitate himself through work, but Michael thought otherwise and refused. He instead opted to destroy the workshop and then punch the rushing guards in the faces. He was only subdued after a substantial number of guards piled up on him. In general, occupational therapy didn't help, so they decided to turn to psychiatry and began injecting Michael with various drugs while adding another 6 months to his sentence. The medicine made Michael ill and weak. He became lethargic, often vomited, and fighting in such a state was difficult. To somehow combat them, he started organizing protests, and in the end, it worked. He was taken off the drugs. Peterson quickly returned to his favorite pastime and once again began fighting with practically everyone in the row, whether he had a reason for it or not. Michael had numerous visits to the sweatbox, only to come out and once again hit someone in the face and go back to solitary. So on it went in an endless loop. As a result, everyone in Walton Jail also became fed up with Michael. He was sent to his 3rd prison, then his 4th, then his 5th. Michael became a hostage to his terrible reputation, and he enjoyed confirming it. Gradually, Peterson's notoriety spread throughout all prisons in England. No one wanted to take on the responsibility. The wardens did everything to get rid of the prisoner, who had the peculiarity of unexpectedly slipping into a berserk rage as quickly as possible. After all, the guards' faces were not expendable, and no one wanted to continually expose theirs to danger over and over. So every time Michael found himself in a new prison, he was immediately sent out of harm's way in chains to solitary confinement. Out of boredom, he began to exercise in solidarity, using nothing but the floor and a bed. As a result, Michael, who was already an outlandishly strong guy, got as swole as a bull. His prison inmates later claimed that he could even bend the cell bars with his bare hands. Peterson would later even write a book called Solitary Fitness, which would become a bestseller in England. There, Michael shared his wealth of knowledge about fitness, which is based on isometric exercises, which people often neglect. Considering that the book is full of crucial information and is written in a rather funny manner, it's hardly surprising that the book became a hit. Michael wrote the following about his achievements. "I can knock out a cow with one blow. I can break bulletproof glass and knock down a steel door. And I can also lift a person and throw him 9 meters. And this wasn't just talk. During one of the next riots, Peterson single-handedly brought in a huge refrigerator and barricaded the stairs with it. In addition, while in prison, he set a new record for push-ups, 118 times in 60 seconds, performed 1,790 squats in an hour, and 727 push-ups in an hour. In 1976, after 5 years of marriage, Michael's wife filed for divorce. The guards, fearing the insane prisoner's wrath, did not dare to immediately tell him the news, and only told him after he was tired after yet another fight. It was around this time in 1976 at Parkhurst Prison that Peterson met the Kray twins, world-famous British gangsters whom he described as the best 2 guys I've ever met. They will play an important part in Peterson's story down the line. Over several years, Michael went through more than 10 prisons and became a pain in the ass in all of them. No one could predict when he would once again snap. He could be totally calm for several months, not be rude to anyone, even begin to be liked by the prison guards, and then suddenly go crazy and attack. It didn't make any sense. Michael didn't complain about the poor conditions of detention, didn't try to escape, or get something in return. and didn't in any way react to any attempts to somehow change his behavior. Finally, one of the jailers came up with a bright idea. What if Peterson really was crazy and needed treatment? After all, no one in the entire history of the UK prison system has behaved in this manner. If he indeed was a lunatic, then his place was not in prison, but in a mental hospital. So, to everyone's relief, he was pawned off to a psychiatric hospital. It was now time for the medical staff to start grabbing at their heads as Peterson's bad habits didn't plan on going anywhere. Michael soon attacked a prisoner with a jar of jam and was again charged with grievous bodily harm. Very quickly, he began to be transferred from clinic to clinic. But since there were only 3 such specialized hospitals in England, the circle very soon closed. Peterson didn't break while in psychiatric hospitals, although he saw enough things to make anyone go crazy. He witnessed one of the patients tearing off his own testicle and eating it, another cutting off his penis because he wasn't allowed to have sex reassignment surgery, a third trying to break a wall using his head as a ram, the fourth gouging his eye out with scissors. Horrific stuff. It's no wonder that compared with such people, Peterson refused to believe there was anything wrong with him. Although they tried to treat him, the treatment mainly consisted of tranquilizers and beatings. Michael didn't give up and beat the medics right back. Peterson later found out that John White, a notorious pedophile rapist, was one of the other inmates, and so he tried to strangle him. Finally, Peterson put his skills to a noble purpose. He almost succeeded in strangling the rapist, but the orderlies managed to pull Michael away in the last seconds, and White survived. Peterson didn't stop there, and in another hospital at Broadmoor, he tried to strangle another prisoner, but again, Michael failed. The silk tie that he used for strangulation ripped. It sounds surreal, but due to his failures, Michael fell into a depression. The depression didn't last for long, however. Ronnie Cray, with whom Peterson was serving time at Broadmoor, arranged for a famous boxer to visit Michael in the clinic. It's unclear what he said to Michael, but the words cheered him up, and he began to terrorize the hospital once again, this time around with much more fury and originality. By some miracle, he managed to climb onto the roof of the hospital, from where he began throwing tiles at the guards and staff. The first time around, they managed to persuade him to go down peacefully, but when he got bored, he climbed back up. Peterson spent 3 days on the roof and was only brought down with the help of special forces. During these escapes, he caused £250,000 worth of property damage. And yet, the time he spent at the psychiatric hospitals was not completely in vain. He became interested in art, began writing poetry, and started drawing some pretty good pencil drawings for which he would receive more prison awards than any other prisoner. As a result, drawing would become his second passion after fighting. Not long after, he once again climbed onto the roof of Broadmoor, spending a decent amount of time on it, and then went on an 18-day hunger strike. He wanted to go back to prison. It was simply unbearable to spend any more time under the same roof with the psychos. Peterson said, "I'd been certified mad because of my violence. I was still violent, and they were now certifying me sane. Where's the sanity in that? Isn't the system just as crazy?" His words were not without merit. The doctors still haven't come to a consensus on what medical condition Peter actually was in, and were already incredibly tired of him. So it was decided that the prisoner was healthy and soon was returned to prison, an outcome which Michael desperately desired. The prison guards, however, were not as happy. Their joy of being rid of Peterson cut short. From the psychiatric hospital, Michael brought back with him his hobby of climbing roofs. It was more difficult to get up there in prison than in the hospital, but when did difficulties stop him? Throughout his future prison career, he managed to climb 5 buildings and even joked that he'd been on more rooftops than Santa Claus. Peterson's initial sentence ended in 1981, but due to the unrealistically absurd and inappropriate behavior, he wasn't released, continuing to travel through prisons. In some penitentiaries, he managed to sit quietly for several months before the first incident. In other places, he started to get rowdy on the very first day. In 1986 alone, he was transferred a whopping 8 times. After 13 years, Michael Peterson was finally free. Peterson went to prison at the age of 22 and 7 months and was released 12 years later when he was 34. Although he was joyfully welcomed upon release by his family, who believed that Michael had changed and would now start a normal life, the former prisoner almost immediately once again broke the law. After staying with his parents for a few days, he traveled by train to London, brought a water pistol, modified it, and used it to intimidate a stranger into taking him to his beloved Luton. Taking up the advice of his prison buddy Reggie Cray, once free, Peterson decided to try his hand at his favorite activity, fighting. But unlike in prison, he was going to get paid for it this time around. An acquaintance of the Cray brothers took patronage over Michael and suggested that he take a brighter and louder name for himself. For example, Charles Bronson, like the famous actor. Although Michael hadn't seen any of his films, he liked the name. Charles entered his first fight in 1987. In total, he had 3 fights in the amateur ring and won all of them, but was disqualified for being too violent. And yet, that wasn't a problem, as there were underground fights that brought in significantly more money. One time, Bronson even killed a rottweiler with his bare hands for £10,000, although he would later state several times that he regretted this decision since he loved animals. His life was seemingly taking a turn for the better. Charles got a job and did what he loved. He even had a new girlfriend. He could have easily become a famous fighter, but soon he committed a new, inexplicable act. On New Year's Day, he entered a jewelry store, knocked out a window, and took away several dozen pieces of jewelry. He quickly sold the jewelry, but left a beautiful, expensive ring for his girlfriend. Bronson seemed to still believe that the police were staffed by complete buffoons and that they would never find him, but that wasn't the case at all. 7 days after the robbery, when the criminal was calmly going for a morning jog, the police rushed him and arrested him. Having spent 12 long years in prison last time around, Charles went back to jail after only 69 days. During his arrest, the police charged him not under his real name, but under the pseudonym Charles Bronson. It was at this moment that the prisoner decided to officially change his name. After the arrest, the question arose of where he should be sent. The prison where Bronson spent the last few months of his previous sentence refused to take him back. A temporary solution was found in Leicester Prison. But after only a few days, the authorities of the prison asked for this lunatic to be transferred out. He once again attacked the guards and again tried to climb onto the roof. 6 months after Bronson was caught for the robbery, a trial took place, and the criminal, as before, was given 7 years for armed robbery. The new prison term was even more colorful than the previous one. Charles started a new habit, which was probably suggested to him by one of the professional fighters. Now, before a fight with the guards, Bronson would fully undress, cover himself with oil, and only then go into combat. Not only did it look intimidating, but this action also had a practical side. The slippery body was much more difficult for the guards to grab onto. During one of these naked riots, Bronson ran around the prison with a homemade spear made from a broom handle and a broken bottle. 1989 was especially outstanding, as during that year Bronson set a record for the number of beaten guards, including the deputy head of the prison. 2 prisoners decided to calm him down one day, snuck up unnoticed, stabbing Charles in the back several times with shanks. Despite Bronson seeing who did it, he didn't rat them out. Considering how he behaved in prison, there are suspicions that these 2 were ordered by someone from above to stab Bronson to calm him down. Ultimately, the plan worked. Charles was treated in prison hospital for several months and then took another 2 years to recover. And in 1992 was released for the second time, 2.5 years before the end of his 7-year sentence. Perhaps he would now come to his senses, but nope. 2 prison terms haven't taught Bronson anything, or perhaps he just didn't want a normal life outside. At some point, he wanted to rob a store and, seeing a brick lying nearby, decided to use it to destroy the window. But when Charles threw the brick, it fought back, bouncing off the window straight into the criminal's head. The blow was so strong that it knocked Bronson down. It's unclear how long the robber lay on the ground, but he was called out by a friend who was waiting for Bronson in the car. Charles got up, got into the car, and disappeared. But he didn't end up back in prison once more because of this comical situation. After spending 53 days out of prison, Bronson was arrested for conspiracy to commit robbery, but was quickly acquitted. 16 days after the charges were dropped, Charles was already caught for good. He was arrested for conspiracy to commit robbery and possession of a sawed-off shotgun. While awaiting trial, Bronson got bored and took a local librarian hostage. When he was asked what he wanted, Bronson replied, "An inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea." But there wouldn't be any need to deliver any of it to Charles, as his hostage librarian turned out to be a farting machine. Incredibly disgusted, Bronson let him go. Later at trial, he pleaded guilty to possession of the shotgun, but not guilty to the conspiracy charge. He told the jurors that he intended to use the shotgun to blow his head off. From the totality of crimes, Bronson received 8 years. He never climbed onto a prison roof again, but he instead found joy in taking hostages. More than 10 people became his hostages over the years. In 1994, just before another fight, Bronson tried something new. Instead of butter, he smeared himself with black shoe polish. Completely naked with only his boots on his feet, the guards knocked him down and dragged him straight to a court hearing, only throwing a towel over him. Standing before the judge, Bronson told him that this was racial discrimination, hinting at his dark skin. Everyone in the court was speechless. Despite Bronson often showing uncontrollable aggression, many of the prisoners he spent time with spoke well of him. They said that Charles always stood up for prisoners who couldn't stand up for themselves. He hated authority, bullies, and vile people, and he dealt with them quickly. In the 80s and 90s, prison was bloody brutal. A mob could come to a prisoner at any time to beat them up, but Charles was ready. It was not for nothing that he did thousands of push-ups every day and began to be considered the strongest man in prison. He directed his strength not only at the guards, but also at those who made others suffer. And yet, the madness in Charles's actions had not gone away. With each new shenanigan, Bronson seemed to want to outdo himself. In 1996, he was scheduled to meet with a lawyer, but a doctor came instead. Bronson wasn't a fan of that and announced that he was taking the doctor hostage, releasing him suddenly half an hour later. By this point, everyone was so fed up with his antics that no one even bothered to bring new charges against him. Then, new prisoners were brought to the prison, or rather, new victims for Bronson. These were plane hijackers, originally from Iraq. One of them accidentally bumped into Bronson in the cafeteria and didn't even apologize. For Charles, this was what a red flag was to a bull. He came to the Iraqi hijacker's cell and took the entire company hostage, using a tray instead of a proper weapon. He made a real spectacle out of the whole thing. Charles told the Iraqis about his dead father, sang, laughed, made them tickle his feet, and call him general. A few hours later, he relented and decided to take pity on the poor sod who he had hit with a metal tray. Unable to think of anything better, he suggested that the Iraqi hit him in return. The terrified Iraqi refused, just in case. Not to leave things undone, Bronson hit himself on the shoulder several times with a safety razor. This theater of absurdity was complete when Bronson's new demands included a plane to Libya, 2 Uzi machine guns, 5,000 rounds of ammunition, and an axe, apparently in case he ran out of rounds. He also asked for ice cream. Naturally, Bronson didn't receive anything he asked for, and he hardly expected to receive it anyway. So he again released the hostages and started a scrap. When Bronson was asked at a trial whether he would plead guilty, he replied that he was as guilty as Adolf Hitler. "So be it," said the judge, as he gave Bronson another 7 years, which were reduced to 5 during appeals. Gradually, the years began to take their toll. Bronson's aggression began to appear less frequently. Another reason could have been the fact that if he did start a fight, the special forces would always be called in to subdue him, and instead of the desired fight, Bronson would receive a rubber bullet to the side, which was much less fun. Soon, due to his constant presence in the darkness of solitary confinement, his eyesight began to deteriorate. So he got himself stylish dark glasses and began to talk more and more about art and the shortcomings of the prison system. The meeting with his son, whom Bronson saw for the first time in 23 years, also had an impact. The crazy prisoner became emotional and was sincerely glad for such a meeting. The son asked Bronson not to get into any more trouble so that they can meet in a warm atmosphere on the outside. Bronson swore that he would definitely do so. From time to time, he really did hold on to that promise and didn't disturb the order. But Charles couldn't behave for long. The next event would forever put an end to Bronson's ambitions to be released. At the beginning of 1999, Phil Danielson, a civilian education worker, decided to make a remark about Bronson's drawings, and the next moment found himself lying on the floor, unconscious. Other prisoners hastily ran to their cells and locked themselves up. This was the longest riot that Bronson organized in his life. For almost 2 days, he annihilated everything he could reach and even broke the washing machine out of the wall. All the furniture was converted into splinters. Thus, the most brutal prisoner in England also became the most expensive. The damage caused to the prison amounted to millions of pounds. Bronson had outdone himself. The court appreciated the performance and gave Charles the greatest punishment they had, life imprisonment. Bronson was clearly not expecting that. Outside, newspapers began to write about Charles Bronson, and he began getting talked about on the news. He became a very popular character. Fame allowed Bronson to marry a second time. Fatima Saira Rehman, a divorcee from Bangladesh, saw an article about him and decided to send Charles a letter. He answered, and so they began a relationship by mail. Fatima visited Bronson in prison a total of 10 times before they decided to get married. For Fatima herself, this romance also brought some difficulties, as she was a Muslim and Bronson was not. When her employer, also a Muslim, found out about their relationship, he fired her. But Bronson decided not to offend his new girlfriend, proposed to her, and declared that he would convert to Islam as Charles Ali Ahmed. Over the next few years, Bronson tried to challenge the life sentence, citing his peaceful family life, certificates from psychiatrists, and other certificates of gratitude of arguments, but to no avail. 4 years later, the couple divorced, and Charles renounced Islam. After the divorce, Fatima called Bronson a cunning and cruel racist. After Bronson was given a life sentence, Charles more or less calmed down, and there were no serious incidents. Apparently, Bronson really wanted to be free and understood perfectly well that with his previously terrible behavior, he would never get to his goal. In 2007, the prison even agreed to meet him halfway and paid him £200 when the guards broke his glasses. In 2008, Bronson became a world-famous celebrity when a biopic about him starring Tom Hardy went on the big screens. With a tiny budget, the film collected a tidy sum at the box office. The first meeting between the prisoner and the actor took place over the phone. When Hardy finally picked up the phone, Charles asked how the young actor was doing, to which he honestly replied, "Not very well," given that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. Bronson shared an enlightening story and asked if the actor had any tea to drink and what was outside his window. He calmed Hardy, an action which Tom was incredibly surprised by. When the actor came to visit Bronson in prison and at the same time observe him, the ferocious prisoner was as happy as a baby. Bronson was skeptical at first about the idea of a film because he knew that the filmmakers would not show the whole truth and would distort the facts. But after meeting Hardy, he changed his mind. He really liked the actor. Charles even shaved off his mustache and gave it to Hardy so that at least a piece of the real Bronson would get on the screen. There was no need for a mustache. Hardy grew his own. Naturally, Bronson didn't attend the premiere. When he finally watched the film, he said that he liked it and that Tom Hardy became his copy. The prison star was so impressed by the actor's performance and professionalism that years later, when Bronson married for the third time and he and his wife were having trouble conceiving, he seriously considered the idea of making Hardy a surrogate father. By the way, his new wife, Paula Williamson, was an actress who starred in a few TV series. She said that she didn't marry Bronson for fame, but that was hard to believe. The marriage lasted only 2 years, and in July of 2019, the then 38-year-old Williamson was found dead in her home. Police did not consider her death suspicious. Since 2013, there has been a movement in England for the release of Charlie Bronson, and he himself even wrote to the Prime Minister asking for a pardon. The movement was quite large, with more than 10,000 people signing the petition to release him. I wonder how many of these people were employees of the UK prison system. In 2014, Bronson committed his last attack to date, and its victim wasn't just anyone, but the prison warden himself, who took a serious beating. Bronson blamed him for the prison mail not being fast enough. The criminal was convicted once again, but they did at least admit that the post office didn't work too well. That same year, Charles Bronson's typically violent image officially ceased to exist. He decided to completely change and never attack anyone again. Since 1999, he has been very interested in drawing, and in 2014 took a new name, Charles Salvador, in honor of the famous painter Salvador Dali. He wrote many books, including an exploration of his own psyche, and his drawings won 11 awards. Some of his works were exhibited in the London Underground for 2 weeks and caused a lot of controversy. The families of people who at various times suffered from Bronson's fists were especially vocal in their protests of public displays of Bronson's works, and, as it turned out, there were a lot of such people. As a result, the exhibition was removed. In recent years, the professional prisoner has been actively trying to retrain as a professional artist. The very first auction with his drawings managed to raise several £1,000s, which Bronson used to pay for his mother's vacation. In 2017, he managed to set a record with his series of works called The Dirty Dozen, where he drew famous murderers who were in prison with him. On each picture, instead of an autograph, he left a fingerprint. This collection sold at an auction for £500,000. In 2018, Charles was again accused of assaulting a guard, but for the first time in his life, he was acquitted. And Bronson himself said that for the first time in 44 years in prison, he didn't intend to resort to violence. He continues to draw and sell cartoons every day, donating money to charities, and has no regrets about how his life turned out. He's sure that if he had remained free all this time, he would have long ago ruined his back and become an alcoholic, and the prison disciplined him, even though it took many years. Be that as it may, a psychiatrist pointed out that keeping Bronson in prison cost taxpayers millions, while there are people much more dangerous than him, and that Bronson might have been able to do a lot less harm if he were free. Bronson is now 70 years old. At the end of March of 2023, a trial took place where the UK Parole Board refused to release him. The council also didn't recommend transferring El Salvador to an open prison with lenient conditions. Another attempt to be released failed. Charles Bronson is an extremely contradictory and absurd person. His life resembles a real anecdote. He is the only prisoner who managed to get a life sentence without murdering or raping anyone. He never knew how to control himself and got into the most ridiculous conflicts, but at the same time, he had enough willpower to exercise daily when only a concrete floor was at hand. Without any exercise equipment, Bronson got so swole that he became the strongest prisoner in Great Britain. He wrote many books about his life and training. some of which became bestsellers. In prison, he began to write poetry and draw, which earned him numerous awards and a decent chunk of money to boot, most of which he donated to various funds for sick children, and continues doing so to this day. In addition, while in prison, Bronson managed to get married 3 times, and let's not forget that they made a pretty good movie about him. Not every person who is on the outside can boast of such recognition, but when Charles calmed down, became restrained, and finally wanted to live normally in freedom, he was refused, and it's unknown whether he will ever leave prison. A star in prison or an ordinary person on the outside, Bronson didn't choose. It's just who he is.